Welcome to Ignite today. Last week we started off with this new series where we're looking through the book of James, and we're going to pick right back up this week where we left off last week. We were talking about trials, and as James explains it, trials reveal how you think about God and how you rely on God in your life, how much you trust Him. You may speak a big game about I'm a Christian, and you post all this stuff on social media, or you put these scriptures out there, whatever it is, but then when these trials come, how much do you really rely on God in those moments? Those moments are never fun, and when they become real in our life, do we really lean on God? This trial is this defining moment in your life where God pretty much just looks you in the eye and says, do you trust me? Do you trust me right now? And James continues to talk to us about these trials as we continue where we left off last week. We're going to start in verse 9, and I promise you today is not going to be the funnest message that we have, but it's going to be so important to talk about. As noted in the title, Exit Wounds, Don't Take the Off-Ramp. That was my witty way of talking about what we're going to talk about today. But in verse 9, he gives us more perspective, and he gives us this very important warning that trials and suffering are this hard part of Christian life, and nobody enjoys it, and they can often leave you in this place wondering, what did I do wrong, or why did I cause this, or why doesn't God care about me anymore? I really just wanted to have a good marriage, or I really just want to feel healthy, and I just feel in pain and hurt all the time, or I really just want to have a little bit of financial stability. God, why aren't you helping me? God, why aren't you listening to me? God, why aren't you taking care of me? James was no stranger to suffering himself, nor was the audience that he was speaking to in this. These people had been driven away from their homeland, and what James is writing to them, and he's writing to me, and he's writing to you in this moment is that God is up to something good during these trials. So again, today we're going to get a little bit of a new perspective on trials as he tells us a couple things today. The first thing he's going to do is he's going to tell us that trials help reveal a false foundation, and that's the first chunk of verses that we'll look at. And then he gives us this warning where he says, beware of the deadly off-ramps of sin. So we're going to start with that first part of trials are a reveal a false foundation. And here's what James says in verse 9. He says, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls, its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even when they go about their business. So one of the things that James does here is tells us that where these trials help us see where we've built our life on false foundations. And one of those things that many, many people build their life on is money. Getting it, saving it, storing it, keeping as much as they can, but we're told here, James is telling these rich people that have a lot of money, take pride whenever you have a trial, because it brings humiliation to you. What he's saying is that no matter how much money you have, you're still going to go through trials. And he says, rejoice in those things, because it helps you see that money is not a foundation to build your life on. There was this lumberjack that was going to go in and chop down all the trees in the forest, and he comes up to this tree, and he looks up, and he notices there's a bird in a nest up there. Well, he didn't want to hurt the bird and take his tree down, so he went and got a big mallet and just started beating the side of the tree until the bird flew away and flew to another tree and began to build his nest there. Well, that didn't do much good, because the lumberjack was going to cut down that tree too. So he walked over to that tree and started beating it with a mallet, and the lumberjack and the bird kind of played this back and forth game for a while, just going from tree to tree to tree, until the bird finally ended up over on the mountainside and built its nest over on this rock area. Now, I can imagine why the bird was frustrated and angry that this lumberjack kept beating every tree that he wanted to build his nest in. But the lumberjack's motives here weren't like being a jerk. Like, it was actually compassion for this bird. And he wanted him to move because he knew that all these trees were going to come down, and he wanted him to build a nest in an area that he could live and survive. And that's what God is doing with us in these trials. He reveals these places that we've put our confidence in, that we've put this sustaining thought that this is what will take care of us, and shows us in these trials that isn't necessarily going to help you. And for most people, they base their lives on this premise of money. Money is security. Money is enjoyment. If I have money, then I can buy anything I want. I can obtain anything. I can have entertainment. I can have joy. It's going to protect me from the bad things that I want. If I don't have money, then I'm powerless. In James's day, the line between those that have and those that have not was pretty drastic, because everybody was pretty much, the wealthy people were just like crazy wealthy, and they owned all the land, and they had all the possessions. And then the poor people had pretty much nothing, and they just worked on the land that the rich people owned. And in this type of environment or economy that they're in, poor people really almost literally had no way for upward mobility. If you're poor, you're probably going to be poor forever. So the result of these people are two very distinct classes of people in this first century culture. The rich felt invulnerable, and the poor felt absolutely helpless. But James is telling them that trials come to all of you. Rich, poor, it doesn't matter. They're going to come to each one of us. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. Even if you're rich and you feel invulnerable, you're very much vulnerable to these trials. I mean, there's nothing like a bad medical diagnosis or divorce papers that are delivered to you or a dissolving relationship with somebody else that's going to show you how powerless money really is in your life. These trials reveal these weaknesses that we have. And all your riches, doesn't matter, all your riches in the world aren't going to stop disease, and they're not going to stop death, they're not going to stop divorce, they're not going to stop broken relationships. He says all of this is just grass. If we go back and pick back up in verse 10, he says, "For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. It's a blossom that falls, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even if they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, the person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to who love him." So he's saying it doesn't matter if you're a beautiful rose or a dandelion. If the sun comes out and you don't get water, you're all going to die. Doesn't matter where you're sitting at. And truth be told, no amount of money can save you from death. It also isn't necessarily going to satisfy you right now. Pastor Tony Evans says it like this. He says, "Money can buy a bed but not sleep. Money can buy books, but not brains. Can buy a house, but not a home. Medicine, but not health. Amusement, but not happiness. Religion, but not salvation. Money can get you a passport to everywhere except to heaven." So again, James tells these rich people to rejoice in their humiliation, because it's going to show them where they put their life on false foundation. And even though we've focused on this foundation being money so far, it's not only money that we're speaking of here. It's just not financially rich, but it's anything that you feel you're rich in, anything that you're trusting in. You know, maybe it's popularity, maybe it's a social media presence. The result is that your identity is built on people liking you. and if this is you, and somebody comes to you and says, "Man, I don't like you got critics or whatever," he's saying rejoice in this, because this is where you're going to figure out where you truly put your trust. This is where God is going to reveal what foundation you have when you have trials in life. That is when I'm forced to deal with the real issues, and where I have my foundation built as well too. I mean, I get up here and I do a message each week, most weeks. Some week Perry helps me out and gives me the week off. And it does feel really good when people come up to me after church and say, Mike, that was a good message. I really enjoyed it. But those moments when somebody might criticize me, or there's a criticism online, or there's just silence that I'm getting into my brain about, what happened today? It says I should rejoice in those moments because that's going to show me where I have my foundation set. Am I up here doing this just to please each of you, or am I up here doing this because God has called me to do it? Trials help reveal false foundations. And the second thing that trials can do is they can take us on this deadly off-ramp of sin. So we need to beware of this deadly off-ramp that sin causes. We'll continue on in this next section, starting in verse 13. It says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away from their own evil desires and entices. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Now, the very first part of that, James gives us this clarification. And he says, any temptation from sin that you go through in trial, that's not from God. In almost every trial, you're going to be given this opportunity. You're going to be given this shortcut. You're going to be given this off-ramp. You're going to be given this way to get away, a compromise, a sinful stress reliever. There'll be some temptation for sin in this trial. And James is telling us that's not from God. One of the reasons James took time to clarify this is in the Greek, actually, the word for trial and the word for temptation are the exact same word. In English, we have two different words, but they use the same word in the Greek. And, we refer to a trial as being a difficulty, where a temptation is this opportunity for us to sin. And he's saying when you have temptations in a trial, that is never from God, because all God has to give is good. All God has is good gifts for us. In verse 17, he says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, the Son, who does not change like shifting shadows. So he's comparing God to the sun. And the sun is always shining. I mean, it's always there. It's always burning. Like, sometimes we can hide from it. We can come inside, or sometimes it's under clouds, but it's still there and it's still shining. Sometimes it's night and where we live is turned away from it, but it still exists. It's still there. And when you're in the presence of the sun is warmth and the sun is light. And that's what he's saying, that the Father of the heavenly lights is just like the sun. God does good all the time because God is good all the time. Bad does not come from God because God is goodness. God is consistent. He is unfailing. He is forever love and goodness in his heart. And as a way of proving that, there's this next verse, verse 18, where he says, he chooses to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be kind of a first fruit of all he created. In other words, he's saying, this is how I can prove to you that God is good and God is love, because he gave you new life even when you deserved death and anger and wrath. Because of what you did, because of what you deserved, he didn't give that to you, but he gave you life. He brought you from sin. This may be a weird concept for you to realize, but your salvation was not your idea. It was God's idea. I know that's kind of crazy to think about. I mean, it might have been your decision because he gives you free will to make decisions, but it's not your idea, it was his. Jesus actually says it this way in John 6:44. He says, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up in the last day. Jesus is saying, if you came to me for salvation, you were only able to do that because God allowed you to. God gave you that idea. In Philippians it says, for it is God who works in you and to will and act in order to fulfill his good purpose. In other words, God does not only give you the power to obey, he also gives you the desire to obey him. So what James is telling us here is that if everything that comes from God is good, and your salvation is from God, and even when you were evil and you didn't deserve salvation, he still gave it to you, that God has always only been leading you towards goodness. And anytime you look at him, all you're going to find is goodness and love. So then you ask, okay, that'll kind of make sense. But if God is only goodness, then where does my sin come from? And in verse 14, we read through it a minute ago, but James kind of breaks down this idea of the anatomy of sin. He says, each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire. Sin always starts with you. It is the evil desire that is within you. Sin doesn't start with the devil. It doesn't start with your spouse. It doesn't start with your kids. It doesn't start with your jerk boss. A lot of people, when they are going through a trial, they want to blame their sin on the trial itself for something that happened within. Well, the way I get treated at work, it just makes me mean and vengeful. If people didn't act like that to me, I probably wouldn't act this way. Or if I wouldn't have been wronged in such a way, I wouldn't have cheated or I wouldn't have said those things. And James says, yeah, maybe you were wronged and maybe somebody did something bad for you. But all that happened in this situation was it provided an opportunity for the bad parts of you to take the easy way, to take the off-ramp, to take that direction of sin. The fight that you had, the boss that you had, they didn't make you the way you are. They simply allowed who is within you to come out. This is the part that I was saying isn't really fun, but it's so important. Because if we're never able to deal with our sin and understand that we are the primary source of our sin, then we're never going to overcome our sin. And it's hard to realize that, but it's been going on since the very beginning of time, since the very first sin that ever happened. I don't know if you remember, but whenever Adam and Eve were in the garden and they sinned and they went and hid, and then God came to Adam and he said, why did you do this? You knew you weren't supposed to. And what was his answer? He said, it's because of that woman that you gave me. Right in that moment, who did he blame? Two people, and none of them were Adam, right? He said it was that woman, and it was your fault, God, because you put her here. You were supposed to do better than that, and you put her here, and that's why I sinned. When we sin, we want to distance ourselves from it. We want to say, that's not who I am. I didn't mean to do that. But in the moment of that sin, that is who you were. And if it's not from you, then where did it come from? Maybe a better explanation as we look at this is as we mature, we maybe tend to make better decisions and say better things and not get ourselves in trouble, and we don't say things that embarrass us as much. And then we get really old and then the filter goes away or whatever, But truly, the real us is a swirl of toxic desires. A few of us were having this funny conversation the other day about we should all come with warning labels and wear them on the outside of us. And so I would ask you, what would your warning label say? I'll read a few. I'm kidding. That was a private conversation. I'm not going to read them. But it did get me to thinking as I was preparing this message and thinking about this and that little funny conversation. What if there were a screen on the side of my head that displayed every thought that was going on in my mind? And as I started thinking about that, I thought, first thing is I hope HR doesn't see it whenever I get to work, because I'm probably not going to have a job anymore, you know. Second thing I thought is Walmart would be horrible because people would hate me by the time that I left. But sin, James says, comes in these desires that are in us. And until you can embrace and you can realize that these desires aren't from somewhere else or aren't from exterior forces or aren't from your trial or aren't from other people, but they're from within you, until you do that, you're not going to be able to have the radical soul change it's going to take to get the sin out of your life. Desire, he then talks about in verse 15. And he says, then after the desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. What James is saying here is sin, it starts out small as desire. And then it grows, and it gets stronger, and it gets stronger. And desire becomes this integrated way that you think, and the way that you think becomes habits, and habits become addictions, and addictions become spiritual death. And I want to make a few observations on this. And the first one is this, is that sin is the devil's off-ramp that's offered to us in trial. This is the opposite of what we talked about last week. Last week we talked about being steadfast, and we talked about remaining with God in these trials and these moments. But this is when you choose to lose your confidence in God during this trial. And you turn to something else. You turn to something else that gives you comfort and gives you peace, and it is not that comfort that you get in God. Satan will almost always offer you an off-ramp, an easy solution, a way to get out of your trial. He says, here's some sexual pleasure, or here's some compromise, or here's materialism, or here's how you can maintain control, or here's some pills, or here's some this or that. Or he's going to give you these options that are going to take you away from the trial that you're in. But the bottom line is, whenever you take that off-ramp, when you go that way, you're really saying that God is not good enough for you, and you need something now. I'm not going to wait for God through this trial. I'm not going to be steadfast with God and learn what I need to learn. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the easy thing right now. And because your soul isn't feasting on the presence of God, your soul is starving out. And if anything's starving, it's going to go look for something to eat. And so you find sin. Because Satan is right there to offer it. He's right there to help you out with it. The second thing is that sin leads to death. Indulging in those desires, it just feels so right. It just feels so satisfying. It just feels so justifiable. But your enemy is truly using those inward desires that you have to take you towards death. There's a story that I want to tell you, and it's really graphic, and I apologize for that, but it does a really good job illustrating what I'm talking about here. So in Alaska, there's a problem with wolves. Wolves are predators, and they go and they kill your pets, and they kill the livestock, and the things that you want to keep alive, the wolves come in and they kill them. So they have designed this way to reduce the wolf population just all on its own. And what they do is they take a double-edged knife and they dip it in the seal's blood, and they pull it out, and it freezes that first layer, and then they dip it back in and pull it out until they pretty much have a seal's blood popsicle, essentially. And they take that and they bury the handle into the ground where just the popsicle part is sticking up. And the wolf comes along, and the wolf cannot resist that seal's blood. It smells so good, and it goes over there, and it just starts licking and licking and licking the little popsicle until eventually, as it's licking this popsicle, its tongue just begins to get numb. But then, as it's continuing to lick this popsicle, all the popsicle's gone, and it still continues to lick, and the knife is there, and it's just shredding its tongue apart in its mouth and just cutting itself to pieces. And then this blood is dripping down, and it doesn't really know that it's its blood because its tongue's numb, and the seal's blood tastes so good, and it just continues to do that and to lick and to destroy its mouth. And then it walks off and is bleeding so profusely that it just ends up dying. He killed himself because of his desire for the seal's blood. And I told you it was a horrible story, but I think it does a great job at painting the picture of what sin does within our own life. It lures us by our desires. And our desires lead it to this destruction and lead to this death in our life. Satan's attacks in your life are almost always beautiful. Like, this is where the movies kind of get it wrong. You know, like in the movies, whenever you're faced with Satan, it's scary and it's this demonic thing. But when he's moving in, whenever he's showing you this off-ramp to sin, it usually looks pretty enticing. It looks like that popsicle does to that wolf. Seems easy. Seems like a good way out of the trial. Then the third thing is the longer that sin grows, the harder it becomes to kill. It starts as a desire, and that desire turns into an action, which turns into a habit, which turns into an addiction, which turns into death. And the point is that the farther you go down that road, the harder it is to break. You've got to kill sin when it's young. You may think that desire that you have in your mind, or that desire that you have in your heart, it's not going to hurt anybody. It's just a fantasy. I'm not going to act on it. Nothing's going to happen. If there's no action, then there's no real consequence, right? But the truth is, whether anybody's around to see it or not, whether it affects anybody in that moment or not, its roots are beginning to grow within and throughout your soul. I heard once that habits are a lot like trees, that they strengthen by age. If you have a little oak and it's a sapling, you can take a young child and they can bend it down, but after that's been there for 50 years, 20 men can't remove that without tools. We have to take sin seriously. Because if we don't, it'll begin to overgrow in you. What do you do? What happens when you get upset or you get angry? How do you think about people that you feel are in competition with you? Because those desires begin to grow and grow until they consume you. And they become actions and then habits. With sin, you're either killing it or it's killing you. Lust, gossip, hatred, self-righteousness, bitterness, greed. You might feel like it's contained, feel like it's harmless, feel like I'm going to filter it. But I'm going to tell you, man, it's not going to stay that way. It's not going to stay in you that way. You got to get it out. Desire grows until it takes over your heart. So here's the question I have for you. Where is Satan beautifully working in you right now to make those desires just grow? Is it through materialism? Are you find yourself more interested in things than helping other people out? You're losing generosity because you're trying to get self-gain. Maybe it's through bitterness or anger. You think a lot of mean and Hey, you don't say them. They're just in your mind. Man, you think a lot of mean and hateful things. Or maybe it's gossip. You like to talk about other people or tear other people down or make yourself feel better. Or even you're doing that in your mind, telling yourself, well, I'm better than them because of this. Maybe it's rage. Cuss and you throw things and you get mad and angry and say to yourself, I'm just in here by myself and not bothering anybody. And maybe you're not bothering anybody yet. But either you're killing your sin or it's killing you. I want to close out with one last verse that we read earlier because, man, I don't want to end today on this downer of, like sin. But, man, this stuff is so important to talk about. I think sometimes we don't talk about this enough because it's not fun. But that verse that we already read about when you don't give in to sin, when you're in a trial, when you stand the test, when you make it through, when you're steadfast and stand by God, it's easy to take that off ramp. It's easy to take the easy way out. But we know the wages of sin is death. And James tells us in verse 12, we read it a little bit ago, blessed is those who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. That gift of God is eternal life. The gift of being steadfast in a trial. The gift of making it through. The gift of not taking the easy way out. The gift of not taking the off-ramp. Stay the path. Stay true. Follow Jesus. It says that crown of life is promised to you. Lord, I pray to you today as we read through these warnings that James gives us. These warnings of where it's so easy to take this way out when we're in a trial. It's so easy to lead towards sin. It's so easy to lead towards the comfort of this world. Lord, I thank you for these words that have just penetrated into our minds and our souls. That we understand the importance of sticking with God in the steadfastness. Lord, I pray that whenever we face those, maybe we're dealing through trials now, maybe one's coming up. Doesn't matter who we are, those are going to happen in our life. Lord, I pray that these words would just remain in our hearts, remain in our minds. And what happens when we don't trust you? Lord, I pray that you would give us that power of trust. Lord, I pray that you would give us within our own free will that desire to stick with you, to know that you are doing this to make us greater, to know that you are doing this to grow our faith and grow our strength. Lord, I thank you for your grace. I thank you for your love. I thank you for your sacrifice for me. I pray that you would give each of us the strength to make it through the situations that even arise within this week. And we do so with you in the forefront of our mind.